Hello and thank you for joining us. You're listening to a Wedotalk with David Jaques. Dealing with setbacks is something that happens to everybody at some point in our lives. And the two things that setbacks usually have in common is that firstly, we can never plan for them. They usually take us completely by surprise. And secondly, having a positive mindset is probably the best way of trying to overcome them. So to say that today's guest has had a couple of setbacks in his life would be a major understatement. And as his journey unfolds and we learn his story, we'll learn how that not just that positive mindset, but true grit and determination helped him to recover from some major hurdles. So it is a great pleasure for me to introduce today Dan MacQueen, who is joining me from Vancouver in Canada. So Dan, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Wedo, and thanks so much for joining me today.
David, happy to be here. Thanks so much for the introduction.
About 8 years ago, 2014, Dan was leading a great life, having a lot of fun. He'd recently earned his master's degree in Sweden. He'd moved to London, where he wanted to locate and live, and got a great job with a tech company. So everything was looking good until he started to have headaches, blurred vision, occasionally some blackout vision, and referred himself to a doctor and then to an optometrist and then got to another hospital. And there was a diagnosis of a non-cancerous cyst on his brain that was causing pressure. So he was going to need brain surgery to be able to remove that. And unfortunately, during the course of the surgery, it triggered a massive brain hemorrhage that left him largely paralyzed. So over the next several weeks, he was in ICU, in and out of a coma, barely conscious, unable to walk, unable to talk, unable to do most of the things that we can do for ourselves, and was finally discharged from the ICU and sent to a rehabilitation center where he had to learn those basic skills. And what he says is, I had to learn to walk, talk, and smile again. So after about 5 months in the rehab center, things were starting to go a little bit better and he was doing well. He did, a term that I love, he did his first naked walk, which means he didn't walk around without any clothes. It was the first time that he was able to walk without the aid of any support devices. And almost about 6 months to the day since the problem started, he was discharged and sent home for rehab at home. A few months later, he was able to start working part-time again and seemed to be on the mend. But that wasn't the only setback he was going to suffer. Right around a year after the first time that he started to suffer the original symptoms, he had to have another emergency brain surgery, again to release a blocked shunt, which would cause water on his brain. That set him back again, not quite back to the depth of where he was the prior time, but he still needed to go back into rehab for another couple of months. And after about a 16-month journey, he was finally able to return to work, had a great supportive employer that supported him during that time. And Dan is going to talk to us today about his rehab, what he did, what he had to do, and I'm really looking forward to that story. But I guess, Dan, one of my first questions would be to you is, when did you first realize that your condition was as serious as it was?
When I went to that optometrist and he gave me a sealed envelope and he told me to go directly to Moorfields Eye Hospital, do not pass go, do not collect $200, I kind of realized this is probably serious, but against probably better judgment, I stopped at home to grab a book, a phone charger, a bite to eat. I figured I'd be for a bit of a wait. And then things slowly ratcheted up. I went to Moorfields, then I went to Charing Cross. Or then I was transferred to Charing Cross in the middle of the night in an ambulance. And then, it became pretty apparent pretty quickly this was pretty serious and I had to let people know what was going on. So I messaged my manager and called my mom and dad and just said, hey, I'm going to have brain surgery tomorrow. So that was a bit of a stressful email to receive, I'm sure, for my folks. And my mom was on the flight the next day getting to London. So she was on the air flying to London, and then I had the brain hemorrhage on the table. So it was quite a fast turnaround, to be honest. It was probably within 12 hours when it all kicked off.
And when did you first regain consciousness after the first surgery?
I was in a coma for 4 weeks. So it would have been probably after that, but I was in and out of consciousness for months after that. So I was being fed by a feeding tube, and I remember having this constant battle with the feeding tube where I'd rip up the feeding tube feed because it goes through your nose and rip it out.
Mm.
And they put it back in, and they'd have to wait for an x-ray to make sure they put it in my stomach, not my lungs. So that made me lose 20, 30 pounds. I'm not a huge guy to begin with, so I was pretty much skin and bone at this stage. But it was a long, dark period in that kind of in and out of consciousness for a while that kind of led me down that road, yeah.
And I'm sure that you were in a great place, and I'm familiar with these hospices in London that you're talking about. I know the reputation that Moorfields has and Charing Cross Hospital. I'm sure you had great care of doctors and nurses and physical therapists and all of the people that were helping you. But how did you find the mental fortitude to deal with this? And did you ever feel at a point that you would not come through it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, David. This is something I was so steadfast with. I knew that this is not an ideal situation, and I knew that the mindset that I had through this was so key. Because if I went down what I call the pity spiral, it was over. It was finished. Um, no more so important than the second setback, because that mental hurdle was so big then. Maybe the physical stuff wasn't as big, but the mental hurdle was so huge at this stage. And I just told myself, you got to stay positive, man. You got to look at the bright side. You got to keep pushing forward, keep working, keep grinding, keep pushing. Like, if you allow yourself to feel pity or feel sorry for yourself, it's the beginning of the end. I think you're unraveling that thread, and once you go down that path, woe is me path, like you're not wrong. It's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
It's not fair. But like the question you always got to end with is and what?
Yeah.
What do you want to
Yeah.
have happen? Like, this isn't fair. You're right. It's not fair. And like when you just kind of position yourself in that mind, like, look, you can't get negative here. You got to stay positive. It kind of that was almost more of a bigger battle than the physical stuff, to be honest, David.
I can imagine that. I actually interviewed someone earlier this year, Blake Burke, who had been diagnosed with a brain tumor at the age of 27 and told me that he'd allowed himself, I think, 1 minute of sadness and despair per day, and just indulge myself in that for just a very brief period of time. That's enough. Now I have to move on. And for the next 23 hours and 59 minutes, I have to be positive and I have to have a positive mindset. So, but that in many ways must have taken more determination to maintain that positive mindset, more than, I'm sure, arduous physical therapy and the physical side of the rehab.
Well, the physical stuff's quite easy to quantify and quite easy to measure and kind of set yourself up for success. Go lift this thing 10 times. Like, oh, I've done that. But the mental stuff's all ongoing, always there. And always nagging at you because, like, this stuff won't work. And getting into the wheelchair, like, I can't tell you how frustrating that was to get in the wheelchair that first bloody time. It took me 40 minutes, then 35, then 30. Like, just every movement was just painful and strenuous and arduous. But like the mental game of like, why is this happening to me? This isn't fair. Like, that's just not going to get you anywhere. And I can't tell you enough. The mindset you take on board with this is so key. And it's something that really allowed me to navigate this in a way that I'm at today. I think the mindset I've taken on board is the biggest takeaway I can share with people is just, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it, I think is the biggest thing. I think Epictetus said that. I was working on some stuff today for my speaking operation, and that was a quote that came up. And I think that's a key mindset to take on board here. It's not what happens to you, but how you choose to react to it. And that's a big part of the mental game. So yeah, it's a huge part, David.
And so then after 5 months, I love this term, you did your first naked walk when you were able to walk without any support devices. How was that day for you? Was that just a feeling of celebration that you were able to walk again?
Yeah, David, it was a great day. I mean, I've got a video I can share with you afterwards. I've got a video of me kind of cruising and vibing and just kind of shaking and baking outside. I mean, to get to walking, like, let me context this up. Like, it was, my leg had atrophied in the coma, right? So it was frozen and the muscle had atrophied. So I needed a syringe, a Botox injection in the back of my leg to loosen the muscle. I had to wear a splint on my leg. For the first night, I wore it all the way into the night, no issue. The second night, after 20 minutes, it was painful. After 30, it was dreadful. After 40, it was unbearable. We agreed to do it for 1 hour every night to stretch the leg because it needed to stretch. That first night they took off, they wrapped the leg up and they gave me a clicker. And, after 20 minutes, I'm like, okay, this is feeling, a bit fresh. I'm trying to pass the clicker back and forth. After 30 minutes, I'm like, this is getting real bad, man. And I dropped the clicker off the bed. And I was like, oh, shit. And the room, I think, was empty at this stage. I called for help. But no one's there, no one's coming. It's kind of like a metaphor for this whole situation. You can't call for help. No one's going to come get you. You got to kind of deal with this on your own. So the clicker's on the floor. I look over the edge of the bed, and it's maybe 4 feet down with the railing on top, and I'm skin and bone at this stage on hard linoleum floor. And I think if I drop down here and grab the clicker, I may break my arm because I got to brace myself with the arm. I thought it was a 50-50 chance. The leg hurt so much that I risked it, crashed down in a heap, hammered the clicker, expecting the nurses to come bursting in to rescue me, and they kind of came in 5 minutes later. Oh, what are you doing on the floor? But that's kind of goes to show you how much of an arduous journey this was to get the splint on, to get the leg stretched. Once the leg was stretched, I used a Zimmer frame first, which is a 4-peg walker. I moved up from the Ferrari to the Ferrari, which is like a fast old person wheel cart. And then I moved from the Ferrari to the naked walk. So it was a long journey to get down to the naked walks, but I was just happy to be moving, man.
And then you endured that second emergency surgery and you had to go back into rehab and relearn a lot of these things. Was it easier knowing what you knew before, that none of this was a surprise? Or was it harder knowing that you had to go through it again?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. I think this one, I've just changed this in my most recent presentation I gave, and I talk about the depths of the human experience. And I talk about this kind of lightheartedly in the talk that I give, and it's like, then we had a setback, and it's this cute little ambulance, and it all seems happy-go-lucky, but I can't tell you how low I was at this stage, David. I'd already been through rehab, so I wasn't able to go through that in the hospital again. I had to do this on my own at home. The noises beeping off again, and I'm just like, you know what? All that progress I had been working towards was washed away overnight. Washed away overnight, man. I had made it back to work. I was seeing the upside of this, and I was getting past it. And then overnight, I wake up, and I'm just like, what do you mean we're back in the hospital? I can hear the alarm, the heartbeat monitors going off, and it was super difficult, and I gave myself a few days to feel real low at this stage. Real pity party for a few days there, and then I kind of realized, I had done this before. I knew what to do. So I got to work, and I just kind of knew that I could build back better. It's not what happens to you, but how you choose to react to it. And that's kind of the through line to this whole experience, is that I chose to look at it like I've done this before. I can build back better because I know the game. I know the systems. I know how I can streamline and improve and stuff that worked going forward that I only learned through trial and error. So
Yeah.
a long way to answer your question, David. It was extremely difficult to get the mind right, but it was simple in terms of a physical rebuild because it wasn't in the wheelchair again. I could still walk, which is nice.
So at some point over that period of time, you were living in London. You did return back to your home province of British Columbia in Canada. When did you move back to Canada, and what made you move back?
I moved back last September. About this time last year, actually, maybe end of September. I moved back home because COVID made me realize it's not where you are, it's who you're with. Lockdown in the UK was quite tough, very strict. I'm a big swimmer. They took away my pool. I was difficult to kind of wrap my head around that. And I kind of realized when you can come back to Vancouver twice a year, London's not so far. When you can't travel twice a year, London's very far. So I moved back home to Vancouver in September and have been here ever since.
I can really relate to that because I live in California. London is my hometown, and I wasn't able to travel there for a long time. I'm going back fairly frequently now, but I can definitely relate. So So Dan, talking about setbacks, just a few weeks ago, as I mentioned, you had an incredibly supportive employer that stood by you and helped you a lot during all of these rehabs and recoveries that you were going through. And then you learned that through a corporate restructuring, your job was getting eliminated. You lost your job fairly recently. Strange way to ask a question, but how did that compare to the physical things that you have had in the past? I would imagine that something like a job loss, as unpleasant as it is, that's happened to me. I mean, I had exactly the same thing happen to me, but something like that happening to you, was that actually an easy thing to deal with because you are not going back to the depths of despair? How did that affect you?
Yeah, thanks, David. So my employer, Hootsuite, I got big love for Hootsuite. They've done right by me. Nothing but love for them, honestly. I really want to thank them for everything they did for me and my family. But yeah, a couple weeks ago or last month, I got let go as a part of a corporate restructure. And it was a kick in the bits, for sure. When I saw that meeting go in my calendar, but had a bit of a boozy lunch, and then I decided, you know what, I'm going to go back down to the Apple store, go to the computer store, and get a computer later that day. I knew that I had to, what a great opportunity this is to pursue my speaking career. What a great opportunity it is to pursue this full time and dive into this headlong. So yeah, in short, and a long way to answer your question, David, the job loss was tough, but compared to what I've experienced, it was a very minor inconvenience, and perhaps more of a focuser of what I wanted to do in my life, and kind of give me a sign, you should pursue this now, because now is a chance to go for this. I don't have a mortgage, I don't have a family, I don't have any major commitments or responsibilities. Let's try and pursue this speaking career full time. So in actuality, it's been kind of it's reignited my drive to do this. I think I was always motivated to do this, but now it's kind of like a burning passion in me. I'm treating this like a job every day. I'm up at 9 or 6 o'clock, go to the gym, work out at work by 9, sending emails, networking, just trying to get in front of as many people as I can to pitch about speaking about resilience and adversity. And I think that's a talk track that is really relevant at this day and age, especially around mental health. I know that many people, especially during the pandemic, have been impacted by the lockdowns or a job loss or a loss of a loved one or a diagnosis and stuff like this. It's all relative stuff, right? You're not going to go through a brain hemorrhage. The odds are very slim that you will, but everyone's going to get that proverbial punch in the face, as Mike Tyson said. You're going to get hit by something, and I've got a great blueprint to show you how you can navigate that and get forward. So it's been focusing, shall we say.
Yeah.
A hit, but not a death blow.
One question I'd like to ask you is that when you received the news that you were getting laid off in a corporate restructuring, it seems like your first thought was to go out and build your own freelance business as a speaker, as a coach, and pursue all these other things. Did it even occur to you to go out and look for another corporate job, or was this direction that you're in now absolutely what you would do?
No, that's a great question. It was instantly I got to dive full on into this speaking business, chase this down. I've got a runway right now where I'm, I gave a talk last week at a company called Spendesk, and they talk about I want to talk about targets and KPIs and stuff, and they're feeling the stress for the quarter end of year targets, and they go, well, consider my situation now. I'm now a 36-year-old, single, unemployed man living in my parents' house, trying to become a motivational speaker. I've asked for 6. I was given 3 months to prove out this use case. I know a thing or two about targets. I know a thing or two about deliverables. I know a thing or two about pressure. But I kind of thrive off that pressure, David, if that makes sense. I love the feeling of just knowing that there's stake in the game. There's consequence if I don't deliver. And I kind of thrive off it, to be honest. And it kind of invigorates me and focuses me for sure. But it's, no, getting another corporate job was not the first thing. Maybe after the time frame comes and goes and we're not able to prove out this use case, that might be something I reconsider. But as of right now, I'm going full steam ahead into speaking and trying to make a difference in this world.
And it's early days, and you seem to be getting some traction, and probably the early time is the more difficult one. The interesting thing is that doing what you're doing, you can do it with relatively little money. You're fortunate you don't have big overheads and dependents and those sort of things. So it doesn't take a huge amount of money. It's a huge investment in time. And as long as you make that investment and you invest in yourself and you believe in yourself, I really do think that with a good clear mind and a good vision and a lot of determination, there's a lot you can do. So Dan, I wish you every success with that, and I really want to see how you develop it and how that works out for you.
Thanks, David. Yeah, it's a great opportunity on the table for me, and I'm really just trying to spread my message and spread my learnings, because it's a shame to leave these lessons learned on the sidelines of life. Like we've walked through some of this stuff today, but the depths of the human experience, I've experienced that, I've faced it, and I've come on the other side. Let me show you a blueprint of how you can activate your resilience and get after it. Like, there's not this mystical thing on the other side of the no man's land. I can show you what road to take, what roads to avoid, pitfalls, honeypots that you can trap you and you think you're safe with. But it's a great opportunity for me to get going now, and I really want to thank you for your time today, David. You've done a lot of these interviews. I think you said over like a couple hundred. Are there common themes that you see around resilience and adversity that you kind of can speak to, or at least identify from speaking with people from a variety of backgrounds?
I think there is, and I look at it as the determination of the human spirit. It really is the whole thing. I mean, what you say about positive mindset is something that is very important. I've talked to people who have dealt with poor mental health, major depression, suicidal ideation, bankruptcy, sexual abuse, alcoholism, drug abuse, living with epilepsy, cancer survival. I've talked to so many different people with so many different things. I think that the thing that probably comes through the most is that whenever anybody's going through anything, no matter what the adversity is and no matter what the major challenge is, we tend to feel isolated and we tend to feel alone, and we kind of withdraw within ourselves and we say, I am the only person in the world that is dealing with that, because that's how it feels at the time. I am very isolated. Nobody else is going through this. Truth is, there's always somebody going through something similar. Humans are social animals, and if we can find our people, if we can find people that are going through something similar, we can find a support group. And that's why great organizations out there like Alcoholics Anonymous for alcohol recovery, and support groups for people going through cancer survival and recovery. And just being a part of a support group and knowing that there's somebody else out there that has done something similar, has recovered, and has a story to share, even if the story is much more successful than your own or not as successful as your own, that feeling of connection and that feeling of having somebody that you can empathize with, I think that is a hugely powerful tool. And that is the one thing I would really emphasize and recommend to anybody that's going through any major adversity in life, is try and find somebody to talk to that understands. Because with the best will in the world, even our family members sometimes, when we're going through these things, they say they understand, they do, but they're not you. They're not going through it. So somebody else that's been through the same thing is going to have a lot more empathy.
That's great, David. And one last question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
If you could go back, let's say 2 or 3 years before the podcast started, and tell yourself before the podcast has started, before you've done so many episodes, what's one thing that you would tell yourself, your younger self, this, or I've learned this from podcasting? What would be that one big theme or lesson you learned?
That each episode you do is probably better than the one before, because you're becoming more skilled at it. And interesting, Dan, that you should mention a time period of like 3 years or so. I did my first one in August of 2020, so it's been a little over 2 years that I've been doing this now. 3 years ago, one of my missions in life was to be an advocate for mental health. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. Would I start writing blogs? Maybe I'd read a book. If I did write a book, maybe nobody would even read it. Podcasting was something I'd kind of thought of. So this is a little bit of my direction, and I was somewhat, discouraged by the fact that we tend to tell ourselves we're always too old to do something, and that I should have done this when I was way younger. I don't have that regret at all, because I probably wouldn't have been in a position to do this or do this as well when I was a lot younger. So you're never too old to start something new. And I never would have predicted or forecast for myself that I would host a podcast channel, and I'd do it as often. But one of the things which I really have learned is that every time you do it, you learn something new. I often go back and rewatch some of my old ones, not because I'm a narcissist and I love watching myself. Sometimes I cringe when I look back and watch some of my old ones, but it makes me realize that I didn't know a year or two ago how to phrase a question in the right type of way to get a great answer from a guest. I'm better at it. This time next year, I hope I'm better at it still. One thing is, though, I hope I'm still doing this, because this is giving me a lot more enjoyment and a lot more satisfaction than years and years in financial services, working with a dollar sign in front of everything and working on other people's money, either investing it or safeguarding it or doing things with it, managing it somehow. This is far more meaningful. So, and Dan, you have your own podcast channel. Play loose, look tight. Would you tell us a little bit about what you want to go with that?
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually drinking coffee from my esteemed Play Loose, Look Tight mug. So the podcast is a creation of mine. Play loose, look tight. What does it mean? David, thank you so much for asking that question. It is about a life mantra, really. So play loose, look tight. You want to play loose. Have fun, joie de vivre, enjoy life. Life is for fun, life is for enjoyment, life is for living. So that's why the play is a very intentional word there. So play loose. Conversely, you want to look tight, whether it be through work, whether it be through your activities. You want to be put together on purpose, intentional. So play loose, look tight. Documenting the process of life after is the name of the podcast. And the documenting the process of life after refers to life after a brain injury and just the lessons I've learned. Each episode has got, an interview with a friend of mine or a colleague or someone who's got some input and some insight. Each episode has got a hack. I've got a whole bunch of hacks for the talk I give about ways to be better than yesterday. In fact, if I may, David, I'd like to share one hack on the podcast with you.
Sure, please.
So this one's called constructive optimism. When I was learning to walk in Tooting Broadway, and after the Naked Walk, Tooting Broadway, for those that don't know, is quite a challenging walking environment, we'll say. I hated it. I thought it was the worst place to learn to walk in the world. People bump past you, crash into you, cut you off. It's a gong show. It's a dumpster fire. This is the worst place to learn to walk. Can't you see I'm walking with an eye patch and a stick? Like, give me some break here. Give me a break here. I was so frustrated by this notion of walking there. And then one day, I'm not sure what it was, but my perspective shifted. It went from the worst place to learn how to walk to the best place to learn how to walk. I began looking forward to those walks and people bumping into me, crashing past you, because if I can walk here, I can walk anywhere. Now, Tooting Broadway didn't change, but my perspective of it changed entirely, 180 degrees. And I began looking forward to those walks, and it just made life a bit easier and easier to go in and whatnot. So I really appreciated that. So each episode's got a hack, and each episode's got an expression. The last one I left with was, I got to see a man about a horse. Referring to me moving back to Vancouver, I got to see a man about a horse. I love expressions like color language, and English has got a lot of great expressions, Cockney rhyming slang, and a whole bunch of expressions to boot. So each episode's got one of those just to kind of keep it lighthearted. It's a pretty serious subject matter, but it's a very lighthearted approach to stuff, as I hope you can gather from from the podcast today. I don't take myself too seriously, and I don't really look at these big, heavy subject matters with a gloomy doom and gloom kind of look. It's more of a let's have fun and improve ourselves together. The whole point of the podcast is to show you a way to be better than yesterday. It's on a bit of a pause right now. I've left it at episode 1 of 2, or part 1 of 2 for like before, during, and afterwards. I've got a lot of interviews queued up that are ready to go. I just need to kind of get some things done on my side. A speaking website, a speaking demo reel are first priorities for me right now. But the podcast is a passion project and one that you can find on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Music. Play loose, look tight, documenting the process of life after. Spaces between play loose, look tight, and all that fun stuff. But yeah, thank you, David, for the question.
Slight digression, but Dan, I have one final question for you. When you were going through your rehab, I believe you set yourself a short-term goal of learning to walk again and a long-term goal of being able to ski again. Yeah. Have you been able to ski?
Yeah, thanks, David. I was. So to go back to Charing Cross Hospital, I was working on the even bars with my rehab team. Now, these are even bars that you hold when you're unstable on your feet. And we were chatting about, what I wanted to get back to doing. And I was still in a wheelchair at the stage, so it was very frustrating to think about all the sports I used to play. I used to play footy and hockey and skiing, swimming, all these fun things. I used to do that stuff, and I couldn't even walk. And they asked me what I wanted to get back to doing, and I thought about it for a second, because this is a big question for me. I gotta have a good answer for this, right? This is going to be a symbol for my recovery and what I want to aim to aspire to. So I thought about it for a second. And I thought about what would be the most difficult sport to get back to doing. And I thought that skiing would be the most difficult. Depth perception, double vision would make things interesting, gauging obstacles at speed, balance, core strength. If I could ski again, I'd have to be in a pretty good way physically. So this past winter, 2022, I was asked when I wanted to make this happen, and I said 10 years from the last time I was skiing, and that was 2012. This past winter was 2022, so 10 years for those keeping score at home. And we picked a date near the end of March. A couple of my boys, RJ and A-Raj, and Andrew, sorry. And we landed on Sun and took the gondola up. It was pretty cool, because when you go on the gondola at the base of Grouse, David, I remember this old hack where you're the last one on the gondola. And that means you can put your skis, you can rest them on the door, and that's kind of like an OG hack. And I was like, I still remember this. Because I used to ski race in high school, so I was on this mountain 3 days a week, skiing a ton. And we got up on the mountain and did a few practice runs and then just ripped it, It was a bit of an adjustment from how I used to go. It was in the sun. But just like how I visualized, there were 3 pumps to the poles into a left-hand turn. And it just was there, man. It just flew silky, some great turns. It was my proudest accomplishment of the whole thing, was skiing that day. I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. Had a pretty boozy brunch afterwards and just enjoyed the day on the mountain. It was great. It was a huge triumph and a huge testament of just, how much you can do if you put your mind to it and really get to work. It was no small feat and something I really enjoyed. So thank you for bringing that to light.
Yeah, well, congratulations. I'm a skier. Life without skiing would be a very sad thing for me. And by the way, one of my favorite place in the world to ski is a little bit north of you, which is Whistler in British Columbia, Canada. So hope to get back there this winter sometime.
Lovely. Yeah, this was on a local mountain, Grouse, so not as grand as Whistler, but for me, it was in the sunshine, a beautiful view of the city. It was fantastic. It was a magical day, man.
Congratulations, Dan, on everything you've achieved, being at this point you're at now, doing what you're doing. I know you're going to do great. You have that determination. You've got that mindset. And I wish you every success with it. But more importantly, thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for your openness and your candor and telling us everything that you've been through. And I wish you nothing but huge success for the future.
David, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
And thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave your comments below and subscribe to our channel. And I'll see you next time. We upload a Wedotalk every week, so if you enjoyed this one, please subscribe and leave your comments below.